folks, I guess it's 4:05, so I'm gonna kick it off and turn it over to these amazing women who are here to work with us today. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all here. This is something the advocacy team is really grateful to be able to offer you. I'd like to introduce you all to Shanaz Brochek and Ashley Nelson, who are joining today from Michigan to share their tools for resilience during these challenging times. They bring a deep background in mindfulness, well-being, coaching, and training, and we're delighted to have them here. Welcome, Shanaz and Ashley.
And thank you so much. We are just really grateful for you and for this time with all of you at Athena. And we teach what we most need to learn ourselves. And as you will see, Ashley and I are not immune to the challenges that life brings. And we need mindfulness and stress reduction, just as we expect that most of you do as well. And if not all of you, right? And so we hope that you will leave here today with some tools that will be really helpful for you as you navigate stress with greater ease, and just sharing some things that have been really helpful for us on our own journeys. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to Ashley Nelson from Optimize You. She's an executive coach, a speaker, and an expert on mindfulness-based stress reduction and emotional intelligence. And Ashley spent about 30 years in her professional life in the corporate arena, leading sales teams across the U.S. and Canada in a global strategy role for a Fortune 500 company. And so, as you might imagine, she understands firsthand the kinds of pressures, the stress, and the burnout that exists in today's workplace, and the complexity of doing all that while being a working mother, right? A person with not just a work life, but also a personal life, and all the responsibilities that go with that, as well as navigating life-threatening medical diagnoses and trying in the background to connect with personal fulfillment while juggling all of those responsibilities. So I think in many ways, Ashley has walked in the shoes that many of us face today. And so she's here to share very accessible exercises that you can integrate in your moment to moment life, personally and professionally, to be more effective, more resilient, um, maybe less multitasking, more focus. And so she's been more deeply trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction truly than anyone I know. She's gone so far in all of the depth of this training that I'm completely turning over the floor to her today. I will run the chat. I will help with Q&A at the end. But truly, you are in wonderful hands with Ashley. And so I just welcome her, and I'll turn it over to you from here, Ashley.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice intro. And Lynn and everyone joining us from the Athena community, really honored to be here, and welcome. So let's all commit for a moment to trying to monotask with our attention, to learn and lean into really how powerful mindfulness-based stress reduction can be, and also how simple it can be, because there are a number of practical, accessible practices that we'll lean into today. Before we get started with some of the content, I like to actually start with a practice. And the first practice is us naming how we feel in this moment. There actually is quite a bit of science around naming your emotions. And so I'm inviting everybody right now to just pause and consider, in this moment, how do you arrive? How do you feel? What emotions might be present? What is your energy level? Not how you arrived 5 minutes ago, and not what you're planning on being an hour from now, but just right now. How do you feel? And if you could type 1 or 2 words about that into the chat bar, we'd love to just take a moment and let everyone connect with how everyone else is arriving. So we've got Laura with some low energy. Lynn is overwhelmed. I'm going to let Shanaz pick up.
Oh, sure. Yes. So we've got curious, deflated, relaxed, excited to learn some new tricks, feeling present, anxiety, thankful, fatigued, content, exhausted and multitasking. Yeah, more overwhelmed.
Right. So a lot of common humanity, I guess I will say. A lot of us are feeling exhausted and tired and overwhelmed. And as Angie just has chimed in, just too much to do and not even sure where to start. Elaine says she's beaten down by life. And then we have some people arriving thankful and content and curious. So there's certainly some toggling between these things, but we do know that there is some science behind naming your emotions, in that when we name our emotions, the area of the brain that we use to grab that word, that vocabulary word, takes us a little bit out of our emotional reactive default area of the brain. So it can be helpful to just pause and name how you feel. And additionally, it allows us to connect with other people, because as you can see from the chat bar, we all are feeling stressed and overwhelmed in a similar way. So just taking a moment to sort of realize that some of the emotions that you're feeling, your colleagues and other participants on the call are also feeling as well. Sometimes it's helpful to know we're not alone. So let's all take a moment and pull our attention into this present moment with another mindfulness practice. And Shanaz and I like to call this a moment to arrive, because so often we arrive harried, multitasking, and this is an invitation to just be really present for a minute or so in this moment, which is what mindfulness is all about. So if you want to close your eyes, you can. I'm going to close my eyes. If you want to keep them open, that's okay, but try to just soften your gaze. And if your eyes are open, look at something that is not going to be distracting to you. So we'll all together take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And maybe just one more time, a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And just notice that you are breathing. Something we so take for granted. See if you can turn all of your attention to what it feels like to breathe in your body. Perhaps noticing the chest and the belly expand. Noticing how things seem to soften as you exhale. And next, take a moment to notice where you can release the body just a little bit more. Can you soften the forehead? Soften the jaw? Even release the tongue. Loosen your hands. And even your seat that you're sitting on. And then finally turning your attention to what feels important to you right now. Why did you decide to create this space for the next 50 minutes or so? And maybe create an intention. an intention for your attention for the remaining time that we have together. And if your eyes are closed, you can open them and bring your attention back to our room together. So we just did 2 mindfulness exercises. We named our emotions and named how we arrived. And we took a moment to arrive, to connect with the breath, the body, and what feels important. So those are a couple quick micro practices that can support you as we all navigate the challenge of today. And the challenge is this: there has been a lot of research done about wandering minds, and specifically 2 researchers out of Harvard have identified that about half the time that we're awake, our minds are wandering. And neuroscientists have also learned that a wandering mind is not always a happy mind, because the mechanism or the network that is in play when our mind wanders is the brain network, the default mode network in our brain that is more closely connected to our negativity bias, to our fight, flight, freeze trigger, and to self-referential thinking. Me, self, how does this affect me? So interestingly enough, when we are not deeply focused, and in fact, when we are multitasking, our mind and brain is using this default mode network that allows our mind to wander and jump from task to task. And scientists have learned a lot about the fact that a wandering mind is not a happy mind. Another challenge is that 70% of leaders, this data comes from the Mindful Institute of Leadership, have reported being unable to stay attentive through the duration of one meeting. And that same institute identified that only 2% of us make any time to enhance our own personal productivity. The American Institute of Stress has released some new numbers saying that 82% of surveyed workers report that their job stresses them out. And half of the workers surveyed claim that they need help managing their stress. About a third of them believe that their jobs are creating physical and emotional harm and also interfering with personal relationships. So this is the challenge that we all live with today. And to layer COVID on top of it, the CDC released some numbers that depression disorders are up 4 times year over year, 20 to 19. Anxiety disorders have tripled, and suicidal ideation has doubled. So it's just a very stressful and challenging time for all of us to live. And so what to do about it? It can feel, as you all noticed and said in the chat bar, incredibly exhausting, tiring, and overwhelming. And our proposition to you today is that mindfulness and mindfulness-based practices are really the game changer. And when we talk about mindfulness, we really mean shifting from that autopilot default mode to awareness. Mindfulness is a practice that really just increases our awareness, present moment awareness. And it invites us to suspend judgment in order to really expand our perspective a little bit more. So the most simple definition is really shifting from autopilot to awareness. And so if we're going to talk about managing stress, let's first just land on what is stress. And the definition that we're using today comes from a Canadian Hungarian endocrinologist who actually coined the word stress in 1936, Hans Selye. And he identified, after researching for years in his lab on animals and patients, patients with chronic medical conditions, that stress is really a non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. So it's a bodily response. And I think sometimes we get a little bit lost in that. The body actually is doing a lot when there is a demand for change. And he identified that when there is a demand for change, there are stages that the body physiologically goes through, and that there is we know already, scientists know that there is a connection between body, mind, and emotions. But he identified that there are 3 stages. There is this initial alarm stage when we feel any demand for change. There is potentially the second stage, which is either resistance or adaptation. Resistance or adaptation is the second stage. And the third stage is exhaustion and, frankly, death. Sounds quite dramatic, but if left in that exhausted, fatigued, burned out stage, eventually the physiological impact will lead to death, which he observed in the animals in his lab and, frankly, in patients that he did so much work on. And so we already know what some of these stages of stress feel like. And we know that there is almost a good stress, if you will, when it first activates, that gives us some energy. And often, if it is a manageable stress, we can optimize our performance. But when that stress becomes chronic and there is this relentless onslaught of it again and again and again, it really just leads to fatigue, exhaustion, and a reduction in performance, because the body and the brain were not created to withstand that kind of constant chronic stress. So burnout is a phrase that was, or a word that was identified in the mid-70s by an American psychologist, Herbert Freudenberger, who says that after studying people in helping professions, nurses and doctors, that burnout is really a state of mental and physical exhaustion that's caused by one's professional life. Nowadays, I think we all readily accept that burnout can happen in any sector of life, whether you are in a helping profession or whether you are a homemaker, a caretaker, a celebrity, or in some other type of industry, that a constant state of mental and physical exhaustion caused by whatever you do all day long is really burnout. And there are actually 3 components to burnout. And the first is this emotional exhaustion. The second is feelings of depersonalization that really turn into cynicism or negativity about whatever it is you do all day long in your job. And the third is really a decreased sense of accomplishment. It becomes really hard to concentrate, hard to focus. There's a lack of creativity, your reservoir of new ideas seems to have run dry. So these are really the components of burnout. And people sometimes ask me, well, what's the difference between burnout and depression? And one of the defining differences is that burnout seems to be most related to one's work life. Depression really impacts all areas of life and also plugs into low self-esteem and a constant state of hopelessness. So there's a really phenomenal podcast and book that I recommend, Amelia and Emily Nagoski. are two sisters who are also PhDs and experts in the burnout and wellness space. And they wrote a book called Burnout. They also have recorded a podcast with Brene Brown. I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. She's done a tremendous amount of research around shame and vulnerability and empathy. But in this book and in this podcast, they also concur that with Hans Selye that there are different stages of stress, and that really the problem for all of us is that we get stuck in this stress tunnel instead of working all the way through our stress and completing the stress cycle. Since stress is a bodily thing, we need to do something with our bodies to actually complete the stress cycle. And too often we get stuck in the stress cycle. And really, stress has a beginning, a middle, and an end if we can work our way through it. But instead, it feels like we get caught in this tunnel because we are trapped in a stress cycle that we just can't get out of. And they identify that there are 3 reasons why we get trapped in the stress tunnel. We get stuck in the stress tunnel. Number 1 is that the stressor is a chronic stressor. It just does not go away, a chronic illness or some type of other chronic stressor in your life. Number 2, social appropriateness. Sometimes it's not appropriate to put boundaries up that could potentially get you out of the stress cycle, or you think it's not socially appropriate. You're too worried about being polite or saying the right thing. So you don't actually comment or identify on what you need and name how you're feeling and work towards completing the stress cycle. And then the 3rd reason we get stuck in the stress tunnel is safety. Sometimes we are in a really dangerous situation, a traumatic or a violent situation, and it's not safe. So we do things, we avoid certain things, or we don't say certain things so that we stay in some type of a stress tunnel. So what are the ways that we can complete the stress cycle? Well, we're going to talk about them in just a minute. There are actually 7 ways that we'll walk through to complete the stress cycle. But just for a moment, when we're stressed, we know what this feels like, right? We feel stress in our bodies physically with a hyperarousal, a tension, maybe this fight, flight, freeze trigger has activated. Cognitively, it shows up as this wandering mind, and we have a negativity bias. We tend to catastrophize. And emotionally, we get really activated, angry, frustrated, sad, fearful. This is all an indication that our threat response system has been activated. And I like to identify real life situations because I think it's always so interesting for us to pause in a real life situation and notice, wow, my threat response system is heightened and activated right now. And physically, this is how I feel. Cognitively, I notice what's happening. Emotionally, I can sense a change in my emotions. And building up this awareness of our threat response cycle is an incredible tool to be able to shift and then step out of it, or know that you need certain practices in order to dismantle the threat response system. So I'll give you a personal example. I was recently in the middle of COVID diagnosed with breast cancer. Clearly, this came as a surprise to me. And I remember getting the call from my doctor, and physically, I remember clutching the phone more and more tightly. And on the phone, she was speaking softly. And then all of a sudden, after the words connected in my brain, what it was, I felt this racing heart. It just automatically started. I mean, all of a sudden, my heart was pounding even louder than her voice was speaking to me. And I'm a mindfulness teacher, so I teach this stuff all the time. But to have that kind of physiological response was really eye-opening to me. And cognitively, what started happening for me is a lot of negativity, a lot of catastrophizing. How do we know it's just in the breast? What if it's traveled elsewhere? Peppering her with all these questions that were really dire and really negative. And emotionally, I felt a lot of fear. And my threat response system, with just a few simple words, no change in anything else in my life, a few simple words, was immediately activated. And so I use this example because if we can all start to notice our threat response system, that's the point then that we can start to shift into practices to basically complete the stress cycle and do something with our bodies to offset the nervous system that is heightened with our threat response system. So mindfulness practices allow us to do exactly that, to complete the stress cycle using certain practices and exercises. And really, mindfulness practices train a capacity of our mind that otherwise gets very little or no training. Because when we practice mindfulness, we are leaving this emotionally reactive area of the brain. Scientists call it the default mode network, that has a number of different brain parts in it. One of the brain parts is our amygdala, which is responsible for emotional fight, flight, freeze response to things. And when we leave this default mode area of the brain using mindfulness practices, we travel higher up in the brain to some of the prefrontal cortex areas that are responsible for more composure, calm, wise judgment, strategic thinking, and closely connected to pro-social behaviors like compassion, empathy, and kindness. So if we can literally start to strengthen the neural pathways and muscles between these two areas and toggle more regularly between them using mindfulness practices, scientists now know we can trigger our parasympathetic nervous system that really damps down some of the stress, alarm, and resistance phases, and even leading to burnout. So let's jump into another practice that is a mindfulness practice that you can use for longer periods of time or even just for a quick minute or two. So we'll do a very quick body scan meditation, another form of meditation that plugs us into our bodies and invites us to just notice what's going on in certain areas of the body. Now, you can do the body scan meditation laying down. Here we are all in a work day, so you can also do the meditation sitting or standing up. But I'm just going to invite you to move through the body with some guidance, noticing physical sensations or noticing nothing at all. And we're not striving for sensations. We're just creating a space to notice. So again, you can close your eyes if you want to, or you can keep them softly open. And take a deep inhale and a deep exhale. And again, first just notice the breathing as you inhale and exhale. And next, I'll invite you to send all of your attention down to your feet. Noticing your feet on the floor or underneath you in the chair. And noticing sensations connected to whatever your feet are touching right now. And now release your attention on the feet and move your attention up the legs. Noticing the calves and the shins. Seeing if you can soften the thighs. Noticing the contact point that your seat is making with your chair. And just noticing if you can release. And draw your attention now to the torso. Notice the lower back, the back of your ribs. And breathing into your backside. And noticing sensations as you breathe. Breathing into the shoulder blades. Notice that they separate on the inhale and release on the exhale. And then bringing your attention around to the front side of your torso and noticing the belly as you breathe in and it moves out. And noticing if you can soften through the front of your torso. Maybe in this quiet space, noticing if you can feel the heartbeat in your chest. Sometimes we can, and sometimes we can't. Just noticing. And then bringing your attention to your face and your head and just observing if you can soften anywhere, maybe around the eyes or the cheeks. And breathing in and breathing out. All right, so a body scan meditation is really one of the foundational practices of mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a curriculum that is taught in hospitals. I teach mindfulness-based stress reduction in several hospitals, patient-facing, with cancer patients, with sleep disorder patients. And the body scan meditation is really a foundational practice of it because it teaches us not only awareness, but also attention and also acceptance. So we notice something going on in our body, we accept it, and then we release, we move on, not because we're avoiding it, just because we know it's present. And now we're going to take our attention and train our attention to go elsewhere. And so when we train our attention in this way, and we also train body awareness, and we also train acceptance of what is in this moment, these are all things that are training certain neural pathways that take us out of this default mode network into this other region of the brain that can be incredibly helpful. And these practices and this training is also closely connected to our nervous system. Because when we feel stress, I don't think I mentioned, and I'll say it now, when we feel stress and the threat response system is activated in our body, it activates this sympathetic nervous system, which is our nervous system that increases heart rate, increases blood pressure, changes our breathing patterns, and all sorts of things that put added stress physiologically on our body. these mindfulness practices activate the opposing nervous system. So it works as they work as a seesaw, and it almost puts the brake on the sympathetic nervous system, activating this other nervous system, parasympathetic, that's responsible for rest and relaxation and sleep and digestion and other automatic functions that the body engages in. So it's pretty cool stuff. And the more we practice, the stronger these muscles get, and the easier it becomes to do this stuff. So the Nagoski sisters have identified 7 ways to complete the stress cycle, and we will briefly touch into each of them. But if you're interested in learning more, their book Burnout is really excellent, or their podcast is a great way to just get kind of the overview of it all. So the first thing that we've all probably talked about, and intellectually we know, movement is good for us, and movement completes the stress cycle. So if you feel your threat response system activated, if you feel stressed, and if you feel stuck in the stress tunnel, movement actually triggers, certain types of movement particularly trigger this parasympathetic nervous system and put us in a different place and different state in our brains and our bodies. So yoga and walking are great, but let's say you're in the middle of your workday and you don't have time to go for a walk or practice yoga. Well, what can we do movement-wise that tells the body, since stress is a bodily response, that tells the body the stress is over? Because this is the thing, this is the whole premise. The body has to know that the stress is over. You can't just say out loud, okay, the stress is over, body calm down. The heart rate's still going, the blood pressure's still going. So the parasympathetic nervous system has to be triggered in order to complete the stress cycle. So one thing we can do is this practice called tense and release. And I'm going to invite everybody to do it for just about 30 seconds. We're going to tense our body. We're going to clench our fists. I want everyone to do it right now. Tense your buttocks, even tense your abdomen. Feel like you're tensing your shoulders. I can't do it because I'm speaking to you, but tense your face, your forehead, like tense everything. And now release. Just let everything release. Soften the eyes, soften the face. Let's do it one more time. Tense everything up. Tense, tense, tense. Tighten the buttocks, even all the way down. Tighten your toes and your feet. And now release. When you tense and release, that release is telling the body, this parasympathetic nervous system, it's okay. You can activate. The stress is complete. So that is one way, sitting in your chair in the middle of a stressful workday, to kind of toggle between these nervous systems and complete the stress cycle. And I think it's a really great in the moment practice. So that's practice number 1. I'm going to check the chat bar because I see, is there any? Okay. So
yeah,
I
looks like there's a link that Wayne shared.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing that, Wayne. Is that the book, basically? The Burnout book? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So the second way we can complete the stress cycle is through the breath. So the reason so many mindfulness practitioners and teachers use the breath, number 1, it's always with us. So it is a portal into the present moment, because our breath is never in the past or never in the future, which is where our thoughts often are, but it is always in the present moment. The other thing about the breath is that when you turn all your attention to the breath, scientists have now started to study what happens when we turn our attention to the breath. And sure enough, what happens is you travel a higher neural pathway in your brain. You leave this default mode network, this emotional limbic system that is closer to your brainstem, lower in your brain. You leave it and you travel a higher neural pathway towards the upper areas of the prefrontal cortex. And it's after studying the brains of meditators for several meditators and non-meditators, scientists have now learned that turning your attention to the breath uses this different area of the brain. It's why so many people ask you or invite you to turn your attention to the breath while doing a mindfulness practice. So we're going to give you today a particular way to breathe that is going to even more quickly access and trigger this parasympathetic nervous system for calm and relaxation, and that is belly breathing. So I'll invite everybody to place a hand on your lower belly and then place another hand on your heart. And what we're going to do is take a deep inhale in and try to send the belly out past your chest, past your heart, if you will, on the inhale. And then on the exhale, use your abdominal muscles to bring the belly back towards your spine. So think of it, belly breathing, almost like some interesting diaphragmatic crunch. And in fact, what you're doing when you breathe out and expand the lower belly, you're releasing the diaphragm. And when you release the diaphragm and breathe in this way, you're activating the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system. So boom, belly breathing can automatically trigger this state of calm in the midst of stress. So let's try it for just a couple breaths. Take a deep inhale, letting the belly come all the way out, trying to keep your chest in place. And take a deep exhale and bring the belly back towards the spine. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, belly out, 3, 4. Exhale, belly in, 3, 4. Let's try to expand it. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Close your eyes on your own and try it. All right. So, how'd that go? Maybe I'm going to pause for a minute and just take a couple comments, because I'll tell you, if you're really belly breathing, there's no multitasking going on, because it takes a lot of attention to actually turn your attention to the belly breathing. So in the chat bar, or feel free to raise a hand or even just unmute yourself. How did that feel? How did that exercise go? What did you notice? Did you notice anything?
Ashley, as folks are adding some comments into the chat, I think the two practices that you just shared, the belly breathing and then also the tense and relax, one of the things I love about them is that they're so short. You can do them really quickly in the space you're in. As you're aware, right, mindfully aware, I'm feeling stressed, in that moment of knowing to recognize and understand that the need to complete the stress cycle, and using this as a way to really take care of yourself. So powerful.
Exactly. And so it's so true. They're in the moment practices. You can do them in a minute, or you can, 30 seconds, or you can practice them for 5-10 minutes at a time. I'm seeing that Lynn has said she felt a sense of softness. And Laura concurred. Leanne felt relief. And oh, I love this. Jen wrote, I was aware of how much I was totally focused and absolutely not thinking of anything else, right? It's monotasking in its full glory. And yeah, what's happening, the softness you're feeling is you're tapping into this particular nervous system that activates our calm and equanimity and relaxation. So if you have trouble sleeping, I know that I have, I'm at an age and navigating a diagnosis that sometimes I've got some insomnia, and I always in the middle of the night I'll do my belly breathing. And even if it doesn't immediately fade me back to sleep, although usually it does, but even if it doesn't do that, I just feel relaxed. I feel the sense of calmness or softness that Lynn just mentioned. So And Christina felt focus. Good, Christina. You're training your focus, your focus muscle. So, all right. So, second way to complete the stress cycle is through the breath. Third way to complete the stress cycle is through positive social interaction. So, there is a lot of science around creating these Uber connection bubbles, basically a bubble of people that allows you to connect and interact. And as you do so and have positive social interaction, the body is aware that there is a sense of calm and happiness going on from all sorts of chemicals that are being activated through the body as you connect positively and socially with other people. So positive social interaction is another way to complete the stress cycle. And laughter is another practice that actually triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, I'm not talking about polite, light laughter. I'm talking about full on, use the belly and the diaphragm, 1 full minute of belly laughter. So whatever you need to do to deeply, deeply laugh, whether it is Stephen Colbert or some incident in your life or a person that brings you great laughter, laughter is another way to complete the stress cycle. And along those same lines, affection is another way to complete the stress cycle. And so during COVID, perhaps if we are alone or live alone, affection was a challenging thing. If you don't have a pet, I mean, you can snuggle with a pet, you can snuggle with a loved one, but even if you're alone, you can express affection to yourself through a practice that Shanaz and I call hand on heart and affectionate breathing. So I'd like everyone to place their hand on their heart for just a moment. And this practice goes like this. You can close your eyes or keep them open. But just to breathe in, noticing a warmth and a connection between your palm and your heart. And breathe in a sense of affection towards yourself, towards your incredible body that automatically functions in these ways that we take for granted. Just breathe in a sense of kindness towards yourself. And if you'd like, you can place a second hand over your first hand, just really allowing the touch to be affectionate. Breathing in warmth and kindness, and breathing out warmth and kindness. So there are some longer versions of that very short practice that Shanaz has on the Optimize You website, and also that can be found on a website that Kristen Neff hosts, Mindful Self-Compassion. There are just some delightful affectionate breathing and supportive touch websites and practices, I should say. But again, the science of affection is real. So 20-second hugs and 6-second kisses, 6 seconds with lips to lips. There is something about the time that basically communicates to your body through a 20-second hug or a 6-second kiss that this is truly safe. This is safety. And if you don't have someone to hug or kiss, you could hug yourself. Give yourself a little 20-second hug. So as long as the mindset is there for the affection. So Crying is another thing, crying it out, deep, deep parasympathetic release, deep vagus nerve activation. And again, crying it out is a way to complete the stress cycle and communicate to the body that the stressful moment is over. And the last way, the seventh way to complete the stress cycle is through any form of creative expression. Could be dance, could be singing, getting in your car and cranking up the tunes and singing at the top of your lungs, and also journaling. Journaling is another form of creative expression. And so I'm going to invite everyone to journal right now and take a piece of paper and a pencil out and identify, just for the next minute, maybe write free form, I feel alive when. And just write, when do you feel alive? And when you hear the sound of the bell, we can stop writing. I feel alive when. And with just a few moments left, maybe take a look at what you wrote and circle anything or underline anything that feels important to you or that you might want to come back to. So journaling is a mindfulness practice and really increases self-awareness and increases our well-being. So I encourage you to use journaling as a really accessible way to complete the stress cycle. So all of us are looking for resilience in life, right? All of us are looking for ways to manage this constant overwhelmed and exhausted tiredness that we feel. And practices that we have already practiced today, a moment to arrive, focusing on the breath, belly breathing, tense and release, naming how we feel, and body scan meditations, all of these practices are ways to train resilience because they unlock inner calm for us. One final practice that activates emotional resilience is the stop practice. And you're all going to get an email tomorrow with all these practices in them, and there will be a guided meditation of this stop practice, but I'll just walk you through it briefly in the interest of time right now. I'll be brief, but what the stop practice is a way to basically inject mindfulness into this moment of reactivity, and using this practice trigger that parasympathetic nervous system to calm and relax. So it starts with the first step, S, which is in any moment of reactivity, just stop. When you can notice that you are reacting, the first step is the sacred pause, stop. The second step is take a breath. And not just take a breath, but really turn all of your attention on the breath so you get the benefits of that. O stands for observe. And what am I observing? Well, I'm observing with curiosity, kindness, and no judgment. What's happening here? I feel myself getting really angry. I'm about to start yelling at someone. Wow, let me just take a moment. Is there something else that might be going on? Was I having a bad day? Did something trigger me? And then P stands for proceed in a manner that will best serve you, others, or the situation at hand. So maybe asking yourself, how do I best want to proceed? How do I want to be right now? So this is the stop practice, and you'll get a brief guided meditation of it in your email as a follow-up to this session. So I really encourage you to practice this because it's a great practice that helps us move through the stress cycle and plug into mindfulness. And finally, one of the most important ways to build emotional resilience is through self-compassion. There is a tremendous amount of science. I mentioned a researcher by the name of Kristen Neff, who is doing a lot of work out of UT Austin and runs the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, that practicing self-compassion towards ourselves is one of the greatest ways to reduce our cortisol and stress levels and build resilience. And so an in-the-moment practice can be when you notice that you are being very judgmental towards yourself, critical, perfectionist tendencies, breathe in, I do my best. Breathe out, I let go of the rest. Very simple practice. So you'll get all of these as a way to integrate mindfulness into everyday life and impact and reduce your stress levels and your stress cycle, if you will. Remember 7 ways to complete the stress cycle, and all of these practices that we very briefly touched on today. I'll now turn it over to Shanaz to close us out, but it has just been a pleasure. So I really thank all of you for your attention and your engagement. And I think we'll stay on the line for a few minutes if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you, Ashley. That was so helpful. And there's so many simple things we already know to do, but I think that connection of understanding the importance of completing the stress cycle and the very specific types of practices we can do to honor that for ourselves, recognizing, I think is so powerful. So thank you for sharing. We hope that that was helpful for all of you. We will send, actually Lynn will send to you tomorrow, Lynn Doubleday will send a digital toolkit with the practices that we covered from today. And then in September, I think it's the 16th of September, we will have another session on mindful self-compassion, which Ashley started to describe a little bit of from Kristen Neff and Chris Germer's work. And so we look forward to seeing many of you there. And please spread the word. We'd love to have more of you again in the future, and we wish you the very best. Thanks so much for being with us, and we will stick on the line if anyone has questions that we can answer. We'll be glad to hang out for a few minutes.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, so feel free, if there's anything you want to chat with us about, feel free to, put yourself on camera, take yourself off mute.
Oh, thank you, Wayne. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'll just tell everyone, I'm done with my treatment. Yesterday was my last radiation treatment. I feel great. I feel fine. And so, yes, it's onward and onward. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you. And mindfulness has really supported me through it. I mean, boy, did I start practicing what I preached come January. So, yeah.
Yeah, it really makes a huge difference. We're so grateful that things have gone well, and yeah, it's a lot to go through no matter what, right? So, and we all have these different challenges in life that come up. We never know what it's going to be,
Yeah.
and so, having the practices really has been tremendously helpful for both of us.
Recommendations for teaching kids. Wayne has sent me a direct message. Teenagers. Well, I have 2 of them. They are now young adults, but all of these practices can be. This is an ageless, kind of thing. And I actually think that a lot of our kids today are more familiar with some of the concept of mindfulness than even we are, because they really are starting to teach some of it in schools. But I would start with children, depending on how young they are. I would start with a breath practice or the body scan practice. The belly breathing is something that they very naturally can connect to. Those 3 practices can be helpful. And there's also there's a lot of books out there. Let me think about what they are, and maybe Shanaz and I through Lynn can send a couple of books. I think there is, I think there's one Shanaz from Kristen Neff, Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens. Do you know about that?
There are some for teenagers, and I was actually just thinking of another book by Dan Siegel, who I think is also just a really great resource
Mhm.
in terms of understanding the neuroscience and understanding secure attachment and parenting and all of those components. Trying to think of the name of the book. I think it's called, let me pull it up here. The Power of Showing Up, but they're founded in neuroscience and mindful self-compassion, and so really great understanding for the teenage brain. There's also a book called Brainstorm: The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain by Dan Siegel that I think is really helpful. There's a chapter in that book specifically for teenagers that I think can be really helpful as well. And then there's some books like the Mindful Self-Compassion workbook by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, which has many of the practices that um, you know similar to what Ashley covered today, and some more that are more specifically in the mindful self-compassion arena, but really designed to help people deal with stress and self-acceptance and seeing self-compassion as a doorway to compassion for others as well, right? We have to take care of ourselves. So many of us in our caregiving types of roles, whether that's in our profession or if it's in our personal lives, it's such a big part. So lots of great resources that are out there, and it's the explosion of research that's happening in this area. I know Ashley and I are real junkies for it. So so much good information out there today. Yeah. Anything else that you want to add, Ashley?
No, I think that's it. I was just, if anyone else has a question or anything, just jump in or chat bar in. Yeah. It's delightful.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Well, we're so glad.
Yeah. Thank you. And Christina, you weren't multitasking. I noticed.
I tried to stay on camera to help me.
I know. Hold you accountable, right?
Yeah.
I know. Believe me, I'm right there with you. I know. All right.
Well, thank you all so much for joining, and thank you, Ashley and Shanaz, for joining us. I think Lynn had to hop early, so we can close out whenever, but thank you all so much. And I know we'll be practicing come our next meeting in September. So I look forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great evening. Good week.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.